Hello? Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. I can see people waving. They're not waving at me. Morning, everybody. Welcome to GEI16. My name's John Langford, and I was just quickly reading what this panel's about, so I'm ready now. Just very quickly, I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves as well. So I said, my name's John Langford. I'm Chief Operating Officer at AEG Europe. I work very closely with these three fabulous individuals. We'll get more into the detail of what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to hand over immediately to Claire. If you can introduce yourself, just tell people a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Claire. I met some of you an hour ago in the intros, but I'm the CEO of AGF and the organizer of today. And in this project, AGF have been the partner with AEG, the O2, Curate, and the other partners to calculate what the emissions are of these events and then to help with reducing the emissions of them as well. That's me.
Cool. Hello, I'm Mark. I'm an unemployable dilettante who is basically a systems change or systems thinking consultant or insultant to governments, corporations, NGOs. Special advice to the Ministry of Defence on national security and climate change. I'm an ambassador for Client Earth, the environmental law firm. And as a consequence of some of that work, I also co-founded a carbon removals business, which after all the amazing work that Sam and Claire have done in reducing emissions, we tried to do the last bit, which is, well, we do the last bit, which is take the carbon out of the atmosphere. But I know this is billed as the carbon removed events, but actually the real focus is on the reduction. And actually we say that the cost of removing the carbon should absolutely focus you on reducing more and more and more. So I don't want your business, frankly. I wish you didn't come to me. I want to be out of business as quick as possible because I've got 2 kids. But I'm here in that capacity as Curate, but I have a wider remit.
Thanks, Mark. Sam?
Hi, I'm Sam, Sustainability Director for AEG Europe. So I look after all of our venues, our festivals and our tours. The O2 obviously takes up a large majority of our time. And yeah, we're going to talk to you today about the amazing events we've been putting on. So
Sam, let's then start with you. So just for context, what are the events? I mean,
very good question. So a carbon removed event for us essentially means measuring everything that goes on for the duration of those events. So we've gone into massive amounts of detail about our audience travel, everything from merchandise sold through to the food and the drink that we sell, the types of cups we use, the energy, the water usage of the arena. Everything is collated by our team at the arena, measured by Claire and her team, and then we pay to have all of that carbon physically removed from the atmosphere. We don't use offsets, and I'm sure we'll get into the reads of this as we go through this conversation, but we've made a very clear definition between offsets and removals. Removals are much more expensive, so we've kind of included the cost for those removals into the business plan. So an average punter coming to the O2 won't necessarily notice much of a difference as they come to the arena and experience a great show, but that's kind of part of the design really. So we've tried to make sure that these events are kind of very thoroughly measured and then the carbon removed.
And specifically these events?
Specifically these events, for now, the idea will be to package this up as kind of a offer to incoming acts in the future so that we can then kind of ask tours to come with us on the journey and see if they want their shows at the arena to become carbon removed as well.
So, Mark, do you want to kind of step back a little bit and maybe tell people how this idea germinated for this exemplar of events that we did with the 1975? Like where did it all begin and how did we get to the events last week or the week before at the O2?
Okay, I'll try and do this quickly. So it started actually a few years ago. So as myself as a person going around being very rude to very senior people, investors, governments, whatever, about climate change, I decided it was disingenuous of me not to remove my own carbon from the atmosphere that I'd ever contributed. So I went to try and do it and found myself awash in this kind of very opaque offsets market, which didn't remove the carbon. That upset me a great deal because I realized, I know from the science that we've got to remove, even if we do all the incredible work in reducing emissions, we still have to remove at least 200 gigatons from the atmosphere, otherwise we never get to 1.5 or stay there. And there was no infrastructure to do that. And so with a very eminent climate scientist and with the help of some investment from Google and various others, we tried to build that operating system of creating an ability for people like AEG to buy carbon removal that actually is legally and scientifically verifiable. We have an NGO that also helps in tidying up that language. It's actually some great announcements today on what's happening in terms of EU legislation on that, which is fantastic. At the beginning of setting up that infrastructure, which, by the way, I don't want to do. I have no interest in running a carbon removals business. I actually have a record deal myself and would rather play needlessly complex prog rock to all white men who don't want to dance. That's my preferred. And if you like needlessly complex rock about death and climate change, then my band's next album is out later this year. But then when we were thinking about, like, well, how do we build that infrastructure, which we need to build incredibly quickly, otherwise, the climate crisis gets worse. We were thinking, and I was specifically thinking, like, where are the catalysts for that? Where are the industries where we can fold the expensive cost of removing carbon into the business model where it can work, and where that will have an outsized cultural impact in that you can. A lot of artists that I know from my time in the music industry want to talk about climate, but they feel a bit hypocritical because they walk onto stage and they say, take the climate seriously, kids. And then it's like, well, wasn't there 40 trucks outside and 12,000 of us in an arena eating burgers? And how do we all... So if we can create a genuine carbon removed platform for artists to speak on, then we can use their cultural power to them to actually talk about how they're doing it, and we can give an exemplar of an industry actually moving towards not only just reducing their emissions, but actually taking responsibility for the rest. And that's hugely, hugely powerful. And that's why I think, I sort of came to you. Well, actually, it was Claire's first idea, because Claire's been working on reductions for years and said she'd never recommended offsets, right? Never, exactly. because of all the dodginess around them. Yeah. But said, like, this is amazing, you can do this. It's very expensive, but at least I can now recommend this. And you recommended it to these guys, and we've worked together to try and do it as much as we can. And what's been great about it is we've not had a single pushback from anybody, not a single fan. The press has been amazing. Everybody seems to think this is a good thing to do. The only slight pushback we've had is from some sustainability consultants in the music industry who said we didn't invent this first and are a bit sniffy about it. But other than that, it's all gone very well. So the idea is to use the music industry, and we're working with sports as well, as a massive catalyst of an industry that can literally fold this into the business model and help us build this operating system the planet needs to remove the carbon. And therefore, I have to show massive respect to my other panelists, because without them, that wouldn't happen, and they are heroes.
Can I just
I was going to say, it looked like you wanted to add, so go for it.
Because we've been working with the O2 for a couple of years. Obviously, been working with festivals for nearly 20 years now, and various artists on tour. And like you said, we'd never recommended to do any kind of offsets. And then it was looking back to the panel that happened a moment ago with the extreme weather events, and the fact that we do actually need to get that 200 gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere, even if we stop everything else now. When it was Mark Ward introduced me to you and Gabrielle a couple of years ago, and then I thought, oh my God, for the first time, there is a genuine way of taking carbon out of the atmosphere, not just preventing it from happening, if you see what I mean. So you've emitted a ton, and you're actually taking it back out of the atmosphere again within a certain amount of time, and then durably storing it. So along with all of the mitigations, all of the reductions, we also need to build that as well. It is the expensive option, and that's why it's only appropriate for those who are in a position that they're already working on reductions and can afford to. And then it's like, what do we do as an organisation with our residuals? And then now this is an option as well. So that's how, from our perspective, we came to this position.
So Claire, you've been working with us, and Sam particularly, for a long time at the O2. So if you look at the touring industry and the ecosystem of the touring industry, where is the carbon being emitted if you take that whole value system? So not just the scopes 1 and 2 at the O2, but if we look at everything, and what we did for this gig, just to tell everybody, is we looked at everything within that ecosystem, right through from decision of the band to play the event to fans coming to ticketing and everything at the other end. So can you just give us a brief snapshot of what that ecosystem looks like and who is spewing what where within this piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a mixed bag, and it's something that we're collectively as an international industry are working to make that kind of map now. There's a lot of research being done, because the scope 3, which is shared, is covered kind of by everyone in every part. So if you're a tour and you've got all of your trucks, for example, that's going to be picked up in the scope 3 of the festival, of the venue, and of the tour itself. It might be their scope 1. Whereas when we break it down into what we actually do collectively, then it's the audience transport, food and drinks, and then it gets into the technical production, or merchandise is probably above that, depending on the quantity of the sales. But the venue, the interesting thing in this situation is that the venue have taken responsibility for everything that happens within their walls. So shall I talk to that now?
Yeah, go for it.
So we broke it down into various sections and thought, if we're going to start to build carbon removals as a cost into budgets, then who pays for that? Because it's not cheap, so who's going to pay for it? And also we want it to influence choices. So how do we therefore divide up Scope 3? So in the case of VO2, we looked at anything that's electricity, for example, or gas that's happening within the venue would be the responsibility of VO2. And then anything that is food, beverage is the responsibility of Levy's, the catering company, because they've got quite control over where they get their food from. Then anything like trucking of the band or artist movement, things relating to set, is going to be the band. And audience travel was just 90p each per person on the ticket, is the whole travel of all of the audience. So everybody was responsible for their own piece of the pie in that respect. And the fact that that budget is put in there, the other benefit there is that we can start to go, okay, it's going to cost, let's say, 150, 200 quid a tonne to remove the carbon. Or we could make this choice that's going to cost us a bit more in advance, whether that's extra time in creative or extra money on a type of food, but it will save the money that we would have otherwise spent on removals. So it's a really good way of building in an economic instrument as well as an ethical instrument, because we know that money talks.
So, in summary, the key players in the industry, other than consumers, in this particular event, put up their hands and said, we're going to pay for our removals.
Yeah.
And then from the customer's side, Sam, why don't you just talk to how customers, how that 90p was levied within the ticket environment?
Yeah, so
and how we communicated that as well, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, 90p, that number is based on all of our travel surveys that we've done for the O2 over many years. So we've kind of aggregated all that data together and said an average journey to the O2 would emit X amount of carbon, and to remove that amount of carbon will cost 90p per fan. So that's kind of averaged out across everyone. And then during the ticket process, we talked to the band, we figured out whether they'd be interested in being involved with this. They said yes, thankfully, and that allowed us to add that 90p into the ticket purchasing process. So as kids were going in there buying their tickets, a little pop-up came up, and it just had a very simple explanation about that 90p was being included within the ticket price, and that would account for the removals of their journey to the arena. So there was a little bit of an education piece in there, kind of showing people that actually there's, their journey does produce some carbon which goes into the atmosphere, which has to be taken accounting for. But that 90p, is negligible in the ticket cost of a standard ticket to go see the 1975. So as Mark said, there was no pushbacks on it, and it was a good education piece, and actually quite easy really to fold into the cost of an overall show, producing a large chunk of money which accounts for the largest chunk of our carbon emissions for that particular show.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry, I'm going to
Go for it.
another thing. Another important point there is that there's also a fee for actual car parking. So everybody got charged 90p, no matter how they travelled, which went to the carbon removals. But then the O2 have also implemented the actual car park. Yeah,
£1.50 goes on to every car that arrives at the car park now. That money is then kind of being pulled into the arena and then used for energy efficiency initiatives as we go forward. And it's other sustainability initiatives across the whole arena. So that kind of money now is it's an education piece again. So people, when they go to the car park or when they buy an advance ticket, it's explained why that money is being added, because obviously car driving to the arena is by far our biggest contributor to our emissions for most shows. So that's education piece there, and also it gives us a pot of money to start doing really great things around the arena with. So yeah, it's a great piece.
Sam, can we just stay with you a little bit more on the event? So we've spoken a lot about the importance of reductions as the primary focus first, before we get to the removals piece. But what did the O2 and the caterers and other people involved in the ecosystem do at the on those three shows of the 1975 to drive the reduction piece?
I mean, I should stress that, you know, the guys at the O2 have been doing amazing stuff for a long period of time. So this is it's not like a new, fresh start. This is just one piece of a very long journey. So the guys have been procuring green energy since 2015, I think. It's a long time. That's a great piece of work, but obviously alongside that, they also need to be doing the reductions. So just last year alone, the LED rollout across the arena saved over 108 UK households worth of energy production a year, just across the arena. We, for these particular shows, trialled a new menu with our catering partner, Levy. So across that whole menu, it was a 30% reduction in the carbon emissions produced. We also rolled out Notpla serveware. So some of you may be aware of Notpla. It's a seaweed-based plastic alternative. It's a 70% carbon reduction versus plastic serveware, which is obviously amazing, but quite apart from that, it's also completely biodegradable, and we can process all of that waste on site with our food waste. So it goes straight into our biodigester or our wormery on site, and all of that waste just gets broken down and turned into compost, which is amazing. So the energy things, the food bits we've been doing, and also now our reusable cup system is fully rolled out across the whole arena. That obviously reduces waste, but also has a huge impact on our carbon emissions. So these are just some of the kind of the big ticket items, and in the background, we're doing whole massive pieces of work on how we can move away from gas, also for our cooking and our heating. And the car parking fee is going to be a huge help with that, because trying to figure out how to retrofit massive, quite old buildings is really complicated and really expensive. And actually, there's kind of a dawning realization that we really need to kind of wrestle that to the ground now and start putting some money behind it.
Before we get into the real technical stuff, I wanted to just clear, just for the benefit of everybody, what is the difference between carbon neutrality, carbon removed, zero, whatever that is, climate positive, where does this carbon removal sit in that mix? And when you had that light bulb moment that you spoke about earlier of here's something I can truly recommend, how does that sit different to credits and certificates and all that other crap that floats around?
Rather than it being on a label, so it's not aiming at a label as such, it was more so about the physical practicality that we've got too much carbon in the atmosphere already. And even if we stop it, we still have to take it out of the atmosphere. So that's the premise for recommending it. But on the definitions, so carbon neutral can be, or was traditionally, and the laws have changed, but it can be making sure that you reduce scope 1 and 2 and then offsetting scope 1 and 2. So you could do anything for that. And scope 1 and 2 is tiny in the events industry, by the way. It's just your electricity is scope 2, and then scope 1 is any fuel that you burn, that you've purchased. So that is a tiny amount of our emissions, and you could have offset it by any old crap that might not even do anything. And you could call yourself carbon neutral. So we weren't interested in that. And then net zero, one of the definitions is that it's a 90% reduction in scope 1, 2, and 3. And then you remove the last 10%. And that has to be removed. And there's a difference between avoiding someone emitting carbon and actually removing carbon out of the atmosphere. Even with that definition, our sector, the events industry, is going to be very difficult to reduce our emissions by 90% because we're just dependent so much on all other sectors. It might be that we get a transport sector that becomes no carbon, and we get an electricity grid that becomes no carbon, and we get an agricultural system that isn't so terribly depleting to the environment, and then maybe we can reduce by 90%, but alone we probably can't. So the main focus here is how much are we emitting, how much can we reduce, what can we physically remove from the atmosphere. I think it would probably be good for Mark to talk to how you actually go about doing that.
Before we do, just what's the difference between offsetting and removal?
So, well, do you want to do that?
You go on, because I've just been talking.
Oh, right, okay. That's very sweet. Yeah, but you are the only woman on the panel, so you should get 3 times as much airtime.
Well, only externally, you never know.
That could be a metaphor for the difference in offsets and removals, I don't know. What's your declared carbon personality? So this is the thing that one of the first things that confused me when I tried to remove my own carbon was there were people telling me I could do all these various things that would, in one way or another, deal with my carbon debt to the world. And I got very confused. And one of the very first things we did when we set up our organisation, we also got a not-for-profit NGO And one of the very first things we did was say, look, we've just got to tidy up this language so that people actually know what they're buying. And we did that, and we came up with some language, and that's now is what the EU Commission is using for all its legislation. So I'll explain it as briefly as I can, and how they're being divided. So you emit 10 tons of carbon. One way, and you go to somebody and say, I've emitted 10 tons of carbon, I feel bad about that, can you do something for me? And somebody say, yes, of course I can. What I'll do is you give me some money, and I will go and protect this forest over here, or this peat bog, which is a good thing to do. And what that means is that thing that might have been at threat will now not be at threat, so it won't be destroyed, and therefore that carbon will be held. That's a wonderful thing to do, but it doesn't remove the carbon you've emitted. All it says is that some carbon that might have gone out in the future will now not be emitted. And actually, there's been a lot of scandals around people misaccounting for how much under threat it was. Some organisations saying, oh, we'll charge you for those credits, even though it was their day job to protect those forests and peat bogs, and they were not under any threat anyway, because they own the land. But nonetheless, there are some people who do that very ethically and well. Another way that you can say, oh, I've emitted these 10 tons of carbon, help me out. Someone say, great, I'll take you some money, and what I'll do is I will use that money to move some other people from fossil fuel infrastructure over to renewable infrastructure, so solar stoves, or moving from a diesel generator to a solar panel or whatever. Again, this is a good thing to do, but again, that's not removing the carbon you've emitted. It's saying that this carbon that might have gone out in the future will now not be, okay? And those two things are quite cheap to do. And there are some reputable players in that market. You have to do your due diligence. There's a lot of unreputable players, and you will have seen quite a lot of the scandals about that. And that used to be carbon neutrality. The problem with carbon neutrality, and one of the reasons it's been made illegal, is because some people were charging you $9 and some people were charging you $15. It's like, well, these are all different things. Carbon removal is where you actually say, I've emitted an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, and there is a mechanism by which I can physically take that back. Now, the way that most people think about that is by planting trees. Planting trees are great, but again, there's a lot of snake oil around that. It's like, well, where are you planting the trees? Is it a monocrop? Have you planted them somewhere they're likely to burn down because of climate change? By the way, don't trees take 30 years to pull back their carbon? So how come I can claim that carbon removal now? So all that kind of stuff. So what's happened now is there are many other methods of removing carbon from the atmosphere, and my scientific team is looking at them all the time, is that removals are now sort of being separated. It used to be there were all the carbon credits, and now what seems to be happening language-wise is that the protection of existing carbon sinks and the helping people move over to low-carbon infrastructure, that's an offset. And the other stuff, which actually takes the carbon out of the atmosphere, is now separating itself into a removal. And so we only do removals, and removals are the only thing that will get any of us to net zero. So the scientific definition of net zero, which is absolutely right, is that you have to remove from the atmosphere that which you have emitted, and that is also the legal definition. That legal definition is slightly evolving, such as some people say you have to reduce 90% and then remove the rest, but that doesn't work for every industry. So that's why we were very careful with these gigs to say they are carbon removed, because that is true. We are removing the carbon. The definition of what is net zero, what is carbon release, is in flux. So we've been very clear to say we're not saying anything about that. We're not going to claim anything on those because the legal position is still up and down, and science-based targets. And actually today, the EU Commission has released a whole bunch of recommendations on what this means and all that kind of stuff. But if you just say we are removing the carbon, that's a very simple proposition. This is a carbon removed product. This is a carbon removed gig. And what we found is that people buying those services are like, I get that. And I think that's one of the reasons we've almost had no pushback from anybody buying a ticket. They go, oh, right, yeah, that's very simple to understand. Offsets and whatever and blah, blah. We know when you go and buy a flight, it goes, pay 18 pence here and offset. Everybody goes like, oh, no, that doesn't seem right to me. But if somebody says, pay this amount of money because we're going to remove the carbon you're responsible for, people go, oh, okay, I get that.
I mean, the concept of removing it is,
yeah.
And for us was quite simple. But how do you actually remove it?
Right, well, getting carbon out of the atmosphere is not hard. Carbon is kind of a very promiscuous element. It's the slut of the periodic table, really. In that it will bond with anything, which is why Mother Nature uses it to make us, right? Like, this is why 70s aliens from movies go, carbon-based life form, because we're most carbon. So we are carbon, trees are carbon. Getting it out of the atmosphere is not hard. Ask a tree, for a previous example. Getting it to stay out is the problem. Because it's so promiscuous, getting it to stay out so it won't then bond with oxygen again and go back up is the problem. And so what you need to do is find methods by which it will be pulled out, and then it will be stored in what my scientific team would call a chemically recalcitrant form. So, for instance, a very obvious form of chemically recalcitrant carbon is a diamond. That's not going to bond with oxygen and go back in. And I mean, if there's a way to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into diamonds consistently, very cheap. I mean, we have Sky down here. You know, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But that's a very expensive thing to do. So there are several things. One is the pulling it out. There are very, very many methods of getting it into a chemically recalcitrant form. Some of them require quite a lot of energy. Some of them require, and so this is what makes it expensive. Okay. So, for instance, biochar is one example, and not all biochars are born in, but that's where you basically take waste biomass, it's where the carbon has been created by photosynthesis into this, leaf matter or waste from a farm, and you put it in a big reactor that's very, very hot with no oxygen, and it basically compresses into a recalcitrant form of carbon. But that takes a lot of energy. And also you can't use fossil fuels to power that reactor. So that's where the cost comes in, is basically getting it into a form that's storable. And then on top of that, there's the scientific verification of that. So that has to be independently verified via a scientific method that we believe is robust, and the science on some of this stuff is still evolving. And then that also has to be legally verifiable, and sometimes that's a different thing. So there's some stuff that we know is happening scientifically, but the legal framework is not there to say for you to be able to claim it. And that's one of the things I spend a lot of my time working on. I've just come back from Las Vegas from a scientific meeting where we're literally working on how we work out the verification of stable soil carbon, which is going to be very exciting. So if people want to ask me, I can literally bore you for hours on the various my scientific team has a watching brief on, I think, 300 methods of removing carbon from the atmosphere. There's another 2,000 in laboratories somewhere. Only about 12 have made it into what we sell, into our portfolio that we sell, that has passed our extremely draconian due diligence. But there's a lot more coming. And one of the things I'm trying to do is get the demand from industries, forward-thinking companies like Levi, like AG, and we can take that money and then we can pump that into that ecosystem to allow the people who can actually do this well to improve their science, improve their verification, grow themselves. As they grow, they get economies of scale. As they get economies of scale, the carbon removal gets cheaper. As the carbon removal gets cheaper, more people can buy it. And we basically create this conveyor belt to build the operating system the planet needs, because all the reductions that all of you are probably working on is absolutely fantastic. And on top of that, as well as we're going to have to remove as well. And if there's no infrastructure for you to do that, then we're on a hiding to nowhere. 1.5 is bust. So.
Claire, I mean, these gigs were only 2 weeks ago, but do we know yet how much carbon was created by these events, or is that...
If we weren't organising GEI, we might know by now.
Small issue.
No, by the end of March, we're going to have all of the numbers crunched, but we've got most of the data in now, thanks to the wonderful O2 team. But the amount that we estimated in advance was 100 tonnes, and we expect that it's going to be about as anticipated, because there are a couple of things we forgot in the beginning, like merchandise. However, there's then been about a whole bunch of activities that would have reduced our original predictions as well. So I think that it's going to be about the same, but we'll know by the end of March on those.
And so how does that convert into pounds, dollars, euros, that 100 tonnes? How much does that cost currently to remove them?
It depends on, obviously, the deal that you get, but in our case, on this situation, it's 150 per tonne.
150 per tonne, and actually, for you guys, it's more. So one of the things we did with these gigs was we launched the Earth % carbon removal portfolio, because I don't want anybody's business, and I want the cost of using carbon removal to further incentivize you to. Because when you put a proper carbon price on your, because you've actually got to remove, and by the way, legally quite soon, that's coming, by the way. So you're going to be legally responsible for anyway. So you're going to have to do this. That should further incentivize to reduce. And what we also did, we said, we should also be helping to fund organizations that are helping the industry decarbonize. So we take a % of our revenue, and we give that to Earth %, and then we said, does AG want to match that? So it actually costs you £151.50, of which we give £1.50 to Earth % per tonne, and you give £1.50 to Earth % per tonne. And we're going to be doing similar portfolios for things like climate, earth, and legal industry and whatever. So everything is about how do we use the cost of removing stuff to incentivize you to further reduce the cost. And counterintuitively, the more we do that, the more people can afford it, which means we can pump more money into the carbon removal methods, which again, hopefully reduce their costs further and further. But they shouldn't they will never be cheap. And to paraphrase Einstein, removal should be as cheap as possible, but no cheaper. If you can write $9 per tonne for a crappy offset, there is no incentive for you to reduce your emissions. And we need to reduce our emissions as fast as fucking possible. And what I'm trying to do is create a removals industry that acts as a further catalyst for you to do that, whilst allowing you to take responsibility for that which you have not been able to reduce yet.
Just wanted to add a couple of things, one on stakeholders and one on the removals methods as well. So in this case, the cost of the removals, it was a multi-stakeholder thing, and this is something that I've seen happen twice now since the pandemic. First was on the Bring Me the Horizon tour, where we had the agents, promoters, venues, the O2 were involved with that as well, all pooling in to do the sustainability initiatives of the gig, to do reductions and to make sure that it was being, like, as many methods of put in as possible. In this case, we've had, I think, Live Nation with a promoter, and then, who was the agent? We've got ATC, the agent, and then we've got AG, obviously, with the O2. It's all of these coming together of big organisations in order to tackle these issues. And then on the scale of the venue itself, the fact that Levy's were doing the food, and then the band dealing with their emissions, it makes it actually quite affordable in a way, but still enough to take action on. And then the removals methods, it's actually quite exciting because not only is it locking carbon out of the atmosphere, but some examples are enhanced weathering, for instance, of rocks. And this enhanced weathering, the carbon binds to the rocks. It's something that happens naturally anyway. But when you speed it up, you get the carbon out of the atmosphere, but it also replaces chemical fertilizers that has biodiversity impacts. The biochar can be put into the soil and also enhance the fertility of the soil then for planting as well. So it's not just about removing our carbon and locking it up, there's biodiversity benefits as well, and in addition. And one of the things that came up about why are we going to do this now, with a lot of people's net zero aims, they've got a target for 2030, 2050, and then suddenly everyone's going to go, okay, we're ready to remove now, and the industry won't exist. So we need to be doing these things now that are also positively impacting the rest of the ecosystem, even if it's not our kind of central business. But like I said before, and I will keep saying, the first thing is reducing, and in this case, that's underway.
Just on the enhanced, I just want to say, as it might amuse you, on the enhanced rock weathering, so what actually happens as the carbon binds with the rock, it actually makes the rock slightly heavier. So I'm literally in a conversation with Metallica at the moment saying, can we do something with you? Because if any band should save the planet by making rock heavier, surely it's Metallica. So me and Lars Ulrich are having conversations about that at the moment.
There should be a competition for that.
Yeah.
Sam, once we've got all of this data and we've got a case study that's been built and created, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to, I mean, is it open source? We're going to share it with the world? Are we going to?
Yeah.
Are we going to do more of them?
Definitely. I mean, the idea ultimately is that this can't just be an O2 initiative, right? I mean, the O2 has got a big footprint. It is an important venue. It's the world's most popular music and entertainment venue. But alone, it can't do an awful lot. So the idea is that we're going to package this up and kind of present it to the world, share the data, make everyone, like all of you guys, aware of the impact that it has had, and ideally start bringing people along that journey with us. Because obviously, if we can start convincing bands and artists, etc., to kind of come on this journey with us, then it could get to the point where they actually ask the venues they're going to kind of do a similar thing. And if it's as easy as we are thinking it is to do, as in to present it to the world, then ideally more and more people will get on board with it. I mean, the O2 are already starting to see it as potentially a way of hooking in acts who are interested in this space, opening up conversations that wouldn't necessarily have been had. And, you know, fair credit to the band, they were up for kind of putting their name to it in a way, which is amazing in itself, because they, you know, putting their head above the parapet in a space which is a bit complicated and is quite new is a brave thing to do. But I think hopefully what we've proven from this is that there is no blowback at the moment. People are up for it, people are interested in it, and it is opening up conversations which just weren't there before. So, for example, some of the creative that we had around the arena for the duration of the shows had a little QR code on it, which people could scan to take them through to a web page which had loads of information on about how the science worked and why we were doing it. And it doesn't sound like much, but we had nearly 1,000 people scan that QR code during those events, which is really quite amazing, really, when you think about it. There's a kids coming along to these shows, taking the time out to scan the QR code. It wasn't on the screen for that long, and go and read interesting information about the show. And to me, that's magic. That's incredible. If you can start getting that seed growing in those people and they start having those conversations with their friends, I think, you know, the O2 has got a really big part to play in this, but ultimately, the more we can start bringing people like festivals, our festivals, AEG's festivals, other venues on the show with us, then the bigger the impact will be.
And you've had other acts already say, can we do this with you?
Exactly.
So, and one of the things, I've just come back from Vegas where I've been working with U2 and been talking to many acts at that kind of level, and they're already in this discussion of like, we're going to start asking venues around the world what your sustainability criteria are and what your journey towards net zero is, and we will start to route our tours differently. So then it becomes a commercial, imperative for venue owners to kind of like, if I don't get you two on that, because that's problematic.
Mark, I wanted to ask you about scalability.
Yeah.
So, we've got 100 tons of impact here.
400.
Sorry.
4 gigs.
Oh,
4 gigs.
Oh, that's per gig. Okay, cool. So we've got 400, and you were talking earlier about 200 gigatons?
200 gigatons by
Which,
2000. Yeah.
I mean, my mind just can't figure out. But that's a shitload.
I think that's the official term. That's the technical term. Yeah, shitload is
Carbon.
is what all the climate scientists use as their measurement criteria.
Well, I'm glad we've got that sorted.
Yeah.
So how do we get, I mean, are we going to get to a place where the technology is scaling fast enough, the affordability, I know we don't want it to be cheap, but the affordability is there, where that equilibrium is that we're actually going to get this shitload of crap out of the atmosphere?
So the honest answer is I don't know, which is why I set up Curate and help and our NGO as well with Gabriel, the climate scientist. We have to go there. Now, scientifically, we can absolutely do that. So if you look at, for instance, some of the stuff I'm working on in durable soil carbon, the soils already store 2,600 gigatons of carbon in them. That's after we've denuded them horribly, and actually getting durable soil carbon back into soil is something we can scale really quickly. And as I say, one of the reasons I was in Vegas was to sit with this scientific meeting with 15 of the world's greatest soil scientists, and we think there's something very exciting that we hope to announce sort of next year about how we can do that at scale and also quite cheaply, and have all the benefits of increased water storage, reduced need for fertilizers, increased yield. So the soils are a thing. The problem with soil has always been, how do you verify it? Because verifying carbon in soil is not easy. It can vary from one corner of a field to another. And also, it's not just at the moment, you have to take a sample and send it to a lab, and you do that once a year, and the amount of carbon, the measurement can change depending on whether it's just rained, all that kind of stuff. So getting an accurate picture of carbon soil durables has been hard, but we think we're solving that problem. Same with the enhanced rock weathering. Actually, there's an awful lot of farmland out there. You can spread this stuff on the farmland and get these incredible yields, and that can scale quite a lot. That can probably scale to 1 billion tons a year as well. There's stuff in the oceans which we think we can do as well. This is not adding iron filings, which some people have heard of. It's the oceans are an amazing carbon sink. Again, the problem has always been there are some fascinating and brilliant methods. The problem is verifying it. Because that's wet and it keeps moving. And it's so how do you and if I can't verify it scientifically, then I can't create a legal credit for you to buy, and then you can't claim against the legislation that's coming. So there is definitely the ability to scale that to the level we need. We have to do it very, very fast. But one of the ways we do that is by having forward-thinking customers who go, we want to buy this now. Because what that enables me to do is go back to all those scientists and all those people who are building infrastructure and say, if you can get where I need you to get, I've got customers for you. And by the way, I've got customers for you tomorrow and the day after, because they've all got net zero targets. So they're going to have to keep buying. And that also allows me to de-risk investment in those players. So I can say to an investor, that company there looks really interesting, but their verification isn't good enough. If you can invest in them to get them to the stage where it will pass our due diligence, then I can bring them, I don't know, the next tour that comes through the O2 potentially as part of, which is, so that's what we're trying to do. So there certainly is. There's no scientific reason we can't scale it. It's still going to be a very big job. The reasons we won't scale it is there will not be enough money going into that infrastructure, which is why the music industry is so hugely important, because A, as we've seen, you can fold it into the existing business model without too much hassle. And then you can create a platform for other people to say, oh, I get it. So we've now had, 68,000 people, 70,000 people exposed to the idea of a carbon remove something and going like, okay, fine, sounds good. So you can also socialize the idea and give a platform for artists, if they want to talk properly about climate and saying this is what our industry is doing. So the answer is yes, scientifically we can do it, but we won't do it unless we have the billions of pounds we need to build that infrastructure into the system, whilst simultaneously reducing our emissions as much as possible. And I think that's where the sweet spot is. If we can create those removals, that removes infrastructure that forces you to take responsibility for what's left, that also forces you to kind of reduce. I want to go out of business as quick as possible. Honestly, I've got 2 kids.
And it's got a great band.
I do have a great. I should be playing to very small audiences in prog rock venues, but this is what we need to do. So the answer is yes, we can do it, but we need the investment. And if we don't get the investment, we won't do it.
So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm going to open the floor for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Before we do, I want you each to think about a question I'm going to ask you, and that's, what's the one thing you will tell the audience today that they should do in their live entertainment businesses to reduce their carbon emissions? I'm going to come back to that at the end. 1 sentence, Mark, 1 sentence. So I'm going to just, if there are any questions from the floor, raise your hand. Right, question at the back there and question at the front. I'm just going to take those 2 questions. Sorry, I'm conscious of time, so you can talk to Mark afterwards if you've got time over coffee.
So you emphasised the importance of reduction before removals, and was the estimate 100 tonnes of carbon per gig across 4 gigs. Do you have an estimate of what the carbon might have been before your reduction methods, and where were the key reductions that you could make significant changes to get?
Great question.
Yeah, so the 100 tonnes, there were already reductions that the O2 had done. I'd say probably around about a 20% reduction on what you'd have at a standard gig, partly because of the green electricity tariff based on market rate, location rate, and then also the menu was already quite low meat. But then there's been further reductions since, and like Sam said, there was about a 30% reduction from the menus, which would, I think that it was around about 10%, so that would be another 3-4% off. The merchandise we still need to look at.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think we are quite hamstrung by the transport system at the moment, because the large majority of that, I think about 80% of that, is audience travel.
Yeah.
So, we can reduce as much as we want, but ultimately what these shows are trying to address is the kind of elephant in the room, which is the thing that we can't really do much about. We can tweak it, we can play around the edges, but ultimately, people will still drive to the O2. So until everyone is driving an EV, what are we going to do about it? And I think these are part of that solution.
And just to give a little summary on that, when we've done reductions, or if you take just a standard tour or a standard show that hasn't really done anything, it's just a bit kind of business as usual, and then you apply various things that can be done cheaply and quickly, we can usually reduce about 30% of the emissions off them, and that's largely through things like menus, waste, energy, and reducing the amount of trucks, and then switching to HVO for a small reduction if you're including out of scope, which I actually wanted to say, sorry, I know I'm using up minutes, we can go over, it's my show.
Okay, I was going to say. Please don't crap on me.
I wanted to just give a big up to Alex over there in the corner. Can you give us a wave, Alex? If you want any technical carbon questions, Alex has been doing all of the number crunching on this gig, so big up for Alex. Shout
out for Alex. Right, there was one question over there, so you got it.
Yeah, thanks. Kevin Mackay from DF Concerts in Scotland. Maybe this might be a question for Alex, I'll ask him later. But do you guys have any understanding of how long it's going to take for the carbon that's been emitted from these shows to be removed? Have you made those estimates?
Yeah, so the first thing is there's no one method. You have a portfolio of methods that have passed the due diligence, and the science says we have to invest in all of them. So, like if you do very good responsible afforestation, that's an important thing to do, but that takes time. At the other end, you can have things like direct air capture that will, you can literally switch a machine on and it will remove a ton of carbon in a minute. So you have to have a mix of both. So it all depends. So with different clients, it's like, well, what's your net zero date? Where do you want to get to? How can we do this? On these gigs, some of the carbon has already been removed. So that's stuff we already had on our stocks, and we said, right, we can now retire those credits, and that's been done, and I think that's about half of it. The majority of the rest of it comes down in the next 2 to 3 years. And then there's a longer tail, which is some of the more responsible afforestation stuff, because we firmly believe in that as well. When you work with us, you get to look on our portal. It shows you your carbon under management. It shows you what's come down, what's coming down, where it's coming down. You can drill down, you can go and see it. And if you want, we can go and take you to a visit to see your carbon being drawn down, if you like. But the majority of it, I think something like 90%, Sam Hope, who works for me, is in the room, and he will be able to tell you exactly, but I think it's something like 50% has already been drawn down or will have been drawn down by the time of the gig. the next 30 or 40% comes down within 2 to 3 years. There's a little bit more that comes down within 10 years, and then there's a longer tail of some of the afforestation that takes a bit longer. But you have to do all of that. We have to invest in all those methods because you also want the co-benefits that come with some of the more nature-based stuff, along with the speed of drawdown that comes with some of the more technologically based stuff. So it's a mix.
Right. So one sentence, what's the one thing you would suggest to reduce emissions in the live music industry? I'll start with Sam.
Work with brands who have a credible and ambitious net zero target, because that will have a huge impact on your scope 3.
I would say work with reductions consultancies who also understand removals.
Take meat and dairy off the menu.
Yeah, on that note, thank you very much, everybody. To Heavy Rock. Thank you.